If I were you, I wouldn't go straight home tonight." The words slipped from Amy's lips like a secret too heavy to hold. She was the nurse who had known me for years, gentle eyes now darting nervously toward the closed office door. "Yesterday, your daughter-in-law came by," she continued in a hushed tone. "She asked about your mental state, if you ever seemed confused. She wanted papers signed about guardianship. I refused, of course, but today your son called with similar questions. They're pushing hard, Mrs. Williams. Please, be careful, and do not sign anything without a lawyer." Those words struck harder than any diagnosis could have. At 72, I had believed the greatest threat of old age was silence. I thought loneliness would be my lifelong battle. After decades of teaching history, after raising a son I once adored, after burying a husband I truly loved, I thought I understood pain. But Amy's warning rewrote everything I thought I knew about family. Only moments earlier, my longtime physician, Dr. Sean Miller, had spoken warmly as he handed me my chart. "Anna, you may live another 20 years. Your heart is strong, your lungs clear, and your mind sharp. Keep walking daily, keep reading your books, and you'll outlast most of us." I smiled politely, but his reassurance no longer comforted me. Because if Amy was right, my greatest danger wasn't illness. It was the people waiting for me at home. The words struck harder than any classroom insult I'd ever endured. My son, Edward, had been mine since age 3. I remembered the night we brought him home, carrying a box of mismatched toys, promising him safety. Could he really see me now as a burden to be pushed aside? I walked to the curb in a daze, hailed a cab, and sat staring at my reflection in the window. Gray hair pinned neatly, eyes lined with years, but not vacant. I still corrected crossword puzzles in ink. I still remembered my students' names from decades past. Why would they lie about me? Only one answer came: money. By the time the driver pulled up to my house, the late autumn air had turned sharp. My porch light glowed faintly, though I had not switched it on. Through the living room window, I saw Edward and his wife Carol, leaning close, papers scattered on the table. My granddaughter Judy hunched nearby, her face tight. As I stepped inside, Carol quickly tucked the documents beneath a cushion. "Mom!" Edward exclaimed, too loud, too fast. "How was the appointment?" "Fine," I said evenly, slipping off my coat. "The doctor says I am in perfect health." Carol's eyes flickered with something that was not relief. Judy avoided me, her thumbs moving over her phone. Silence pressed the walls. "That's wonderful," Carol managed. "It means you'll have plenty of time to consider new options. You know, places with nurses, activities, people your age." My heart thudded. Was this what Amy meant? They were preparing to move me like furniture. We sat down to dinner, but the warmth of roasted chicken could not thaw the chill between us. Edward asked nothing. Carol gave clipped replies. Judy barely looked at me. The clink of forks against plates sounded like hammers. I swallowed hard, keeping my face calm. Later, I retreated to my bedroom, locked the door, and pressed my back against it. Never before had I locked that door. Amy's warning repeated in my ears. "Don't sign anything. Don't go home." Too late, I was already here, and the danger lived under my roof. Just past midnight, I heard voices below. Curiosity or perhaps instinct carried me to the landing. Their words floated upward, slicing me with every syllable. "Need her to sign the power of attorney soon," Carol whispered. "Relax," Edward answered. "If this doctor won't help, another will. Once the papers are done, the house is worth over $1 million, plus her pension. That covers everything." Judy's voice joined, steady, cold. "But I need the money now. I can't wait for her to die." My knees weakened. They were not simply planning, they were determined. They were calculating years of my life as if they were rent money overdue. I crept back to my room, tears burning hot. They saw me not as mother, not as grandmother, but as an obstacle. I thought of the countless nights I graded essays while Edward slept peacefully, of the evenings I sewed Judy's Halloween costumes by hand. All dismissed, all erased, replaced by greed. As I lay in bed until dawn, one truth grew louder than fear. My family was plotting my downfall. And if they wanted war, they had chosen the wrong woman. I had been underestimated before in classrooms, in faculty meetings, in the lonely years after widowhood, but never again. The morning after that sleepless night, the house felt heavy, as though every wall knew what I had overheard. I brewed my coffee like always, measuring the scoops by memory, but the taste had turned bitter. The kitchen smelled of betrayal more than roasted beans. Edward sat at the table pretending to read a newspaper, though the pages were upside down. Carol washed an already clean glass, scrubbing with needless force. Judy slipped in last, hoodie up, phone in hand. None of them looked at me directly. "Sleep well, Mom?" Edward asked with forced cheer. "As well as any woman who still pays the mortgage," I replied. His smile cracked, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of control. Silence stretched long enough to humiliate them. Finally, Carol spoke. "We were thinking, Anna, maybe you'd be happier with people your own age. You deserve comfort, company, medical staff right there if you need it." "I already have company," I said flatly. "And a doctor who says I am perfectly healthy." Her jaw tightened. Judy fidgeted, tapping her phone like she wanted to text her way out of the room. Edward folded the newspaper and cleared his throat. "We'll talk later," he said. "We don't need to rush." But I already knew they were rushing. They had a folder of forged intentions waiting in the closet. They wanted my signature. They wanted my silence. When they left the house later that day, Edward to his meetings, Carol to run errands, Judy to the library, I checked the hall closet. There, beside my old coats, lay the fireproof folder I had spotted the night before. I pulled it out and flipped through the contents. Copies of my Social Security card, driver's license, and a checklist titled Guardianship Packet. On top was a sticky note in Carol's handwriting. "Need doctor letters. Find second opinion." My hands shook, not from age, but from rage. For 40 years I had worked extra shifts, grading essays late into the night, sewing clothes to save money, denying myself vacations. Every sacrifice had been for Edward's future. Now those sacrifices were blueprints for theft. I returned the folder carefully. If they wanted to play games, I would let them believe I was still in the dark. Meanwhile, I needed allies. The first person I thought of was the bank manager, a woman I had known for decades. She had guided me when my husband passed, setting up accounts, reminding me to guard my independence. She was one of the few people who had never treated me like a helpless widow. I locked my bedroom door and dialed her office. "I need a verbal alert on all my accounts," I said. "No changes, no withdrawals, no joint access. If anyone calls, you contact me directly." She paused. "Mrs. Williams, are you safe?" "Yes," I answered, "and I intend to stay that way." We arranged a morning appointment to tighten security. Hanging up, I felt the smallest measure of strength return. My family thought they were the only ones planning. They were wrong. By dinner, the house pulsed with tension. The table looked the same: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, but every bite tasted poisoned by pretense. Afterward, Edward leaned forward, voice coated in concern. "Mom, you've seemed forgetful. Overwhelmed. We only want to help. A power of attorney isn't scary, it just protects you." I met his eyes. A power of attorney is not protection, it's surrender, and I am not surrendering. Color flushed his face. Carol jumped in quickly. "No one is forcing you, we just care. Think of the activities, the friends you'd make." Her voice strained, more desperate than persuasive. Judy finally spoke, her tone low. "Grandma, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Things would be easier." Easier. The word stabbed. Easier for them, not for me. Easier to erase the woman who had rocked Edward to sleep during thunderstorms, who had driven Judy to piano lessons, who had buried her own dreams to keep food on the table. Their comfort required my disappearance. I stood slowly. "We can revisit this when you remember who I am," I said. "Until then, there is nothing more to discuss." That night, I shoved a chair beneath my bedroom doorknob. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted the reminder that I had boundaries. I pulled out my small suitcase and set it on the bed. Not to pack fully, not yet, but to remind myself I had choices. Then I opened a notebook and began listing everything. Accounts, investments, the trust my husband left, and names of lawyers who still answered calls after hours. At the top of the page, I wrote 3 promises and underlined them twice. No signatures, no secrets, no surrender. Downstairs, I heard cabinets slam, voices hiss in frustration. Let them whisper, let them think I was still blind. Storms, I knew, could be steered, and this time I intended to hold the wheel. The house slept uneasily that night, but I did not. I lay awake with my notebook open, the promises underlined, staring back at me in the lamplight. No signatures, no secrets, no surrender. For decades I had hidden the truth even from Edward. When my husband died 12 years ago, he left more than memories. He left me instructions, carefully written in his neat script, and keys to safety deposit boxes spread across 3 different banks. I followed them quietly, telling no one, not even my son. Edward always believed the house and my teacher's pension were the extent of my means. He was wrong. The first account sat in a trust worth $4.5 million, money my husband had saved from years of contracting work and investments. Added to that were 3 small properties overseas, purchased decades earlier when real estate was cheap. Together, those were worth another $3.5 million. My late husband had been cautious, almost secretive. He wanted to ensure I could live comfortably, travel if I wished, and never depend on anyone, not even Edward. I honored his wish by keeping silent. I wanted Edward to build his own life, to learn responsibility, to measure success by effort rather than inheritance. Instead, he gambled, he borrowed, and now he plotted. In the early hours, I walked to my cedar chest and opened the hidden compartment. Inside lay a folder of documents, property deeds, trust statements, and a small notebook where my husband had written the contact information of lawyers and financial advisors. I ran my hand across his handwriting, feeling both grief and gratitude. "They think I am defenseless," I whispered aloud, "but I am not." The question became how to use these hidden resources. If Edward and Carol were already forging documents, I needed proof strong enough to crush them in court. Money alone would not protect me. Strategy would. By mid-morning, I dressed carefully, chose a plain wool coat, and carried the folder in my bag. I drove myself downtown, hands steady on the wheel. My destination was the law office of Jacob Martinez, a man recommended to me years earlier by a retired colleague. He specialized in elder law and had earned a reputation for dismantling fraudulent guardianships. The receptionist, a young man with sharp glasses, ushered me in quickly. "Mrs. Williams, Mr. Martinez will see you now." Jacob rose from behind his desk, tall and gray at the temples, his handshake firm. "Please, sit. How can I help you?" I told him everything. The call from Amy, the nurse, the folder in my closet, the whispers at midnight. His expression darkened. "This is serious," he said. "If your family convinces a court you're incompetent, they could seize control before you know it. But you said you have assets they don't know about?" I opened the folder, laying out the trust papers and property deeds. For a moment, his brows lifted. "Mrs. Williams, you're not only a target, you're a wealthy woman. That makes the danger greater, but it also gives us leverage." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Jean, come in, please." A woman in her 30s entered, wearing a leather jacket over a neat blouse. Jacob introduced her as Jean, his lead investigator. "She will help document everything. Fraud leaves fingerprints, and we'll find them." Jean nodded. "I'll start with financial activity under your name. Credit cards, loans, property listings. If they've already stolen from you, we'll know." Relief warmed me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't alone. That afternoon, Jacob gave me clear instructions. "Do not confront them directly yet. Let them think you're still in the dark. Meanwhile, we'll gather proof. When we act, it will be decisive." I returned home with a calmer heart, though the kitchen still reeked of tension. Carol greeted me with her rehearsed smile. Edward asked no questions. Judy barely lifted her eyes from her phone. None of them suspected that while they plotted in whispers, I was building an army in silence. Later that evening, as I folded laundry, my phone buzzed. A message from Jacob. "Jean already found 2 credit cards opened in your name, balances near $95,000. We'll have full statements tomorrow." My knees nearly buckled. $95,000 stolen already, so it was not only plans, they had begun execution. I sat heavily on the bed, clutching the phone. Rage flared, but so did resolve. My hidden millions were not just for comfort. They were my shield, my sword, my way to turn their greed back upon them. Upstairs, I heard Judy's footsteps. She passed my door without knocking, humming softly, but I caught words under her breath. "It'll be easier soon." I closed my eyes, breathing deep. They wanted easy. They wanted fast. But storms could be steered, and I had just decided the direction. I arrived at Jacob Martinez's office the next morning carrying my husband's folder pressed tightly against my chest. The weight of it felt less like paper and more like a shield. Jacob greeted me warmly, then called in his investigator, Jean, the sharp-eyed woman in the leather jacket. Her handshake was brisk, professional, and left no room for doubt she was the kind of ally who thrived in the shadows. We sat together in the conference room while I explained again what had happened. Amy's warning, the whispered midnight plan, the fireproof folder stuffed with guardianship checklists. Jacob listened with the patience of a teacher grading an essay, nodding slowly. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Williams, elder financial abuse is more common than most people realize. But you have something many don't: foresight, assets, and proof. That combination is powerful." Jean flipped open a notepad. "I'll start immediately. We'll check your credit, bank activity, property records, and anything filed under your name. If they've already made moves, there will be trails." "They have," I said grimly. "I saw copies of my Social Security card in that folder. And last night, I overheard them discuss selling the house. My own house." Jacob tapped the table. "Then we catch them before they catch you. Don't confront them yet. Let them believe you're still in the dark. Meanwhile, Jean and I will build the case." I left their office lighter than I had entered. The air outside smelled of cold rain, but for once it didn't chill me. I had allies. I had a plan. That evening, while Edward and Carol bickered over dinner preparations, I excused myself to my room and checked my phone. A message from Jean awaited me. "2 credit cards opened under your name. Balances totaling $95,000. We'll have statements tomorrow." My heart thudded. $95,000 stolen already. It wasn't just planning, it was theft in progress. They were bleeding me dry while pretending to worry about my health. The next morning, Jean called. "Mrs. Williams, it's worse than we thought. They've been using those cards at luxury stores, fine restaurants, even a weekend at a coastal resort, all billed to you." "While they told me they were visiting Carol's sick mother," I murmured, my chest tightening. "They lied to my face." "That lie," Jean said firmly, "is now evidence." 2 days later, Jacob summoned me back to the office. Spread across the polished oak table were photographs, receipts, and bank statements. Jean's team had documented everything. One picture showed Carol leaving a jewelry store carrying a branded bag. Another captured Edward meeting a man in a dim bar later identified as a known bookmaker. Jacob gestured at the pile. "This is enough for fraud charges, but I'd advise patience. Let them dig deeper. Every step they take tightens the rope." Patience had never been harder. Each evening I returned home to Carol's forced cheer, Edward's hollow questions, Judy's evasive glances. But I played my role, the fragile grandmother who didn't notice. Inside, I was steel. Late one night, while folding laundry, I heard them again downstairs. Edward's voice, low and urgent. "We need a doctor who'll sign off soon. Without papers, the bank won't budge. And I owe over $100,000 already," Carol hissed. "Then find one. We can't wait forever. Judy's tuition is due, and I refuse to live on scraps while your mother sits on her savings." Their words burned into me. $100,000 in gambling debt, Judy's tuition used as justification for betrayal. My sacrifices were currency in their arguments. I recorded the muffled voices on my phone, proof of intent. Then I slipped back to my room, my heart pounding with both fear and triumph. They were handing me weapons with every careless word. By the week's end, Jean delivered more findings. Edward recently met with a document forger. He paid a deposit of $120,000 for fabricated medical records declaring you incompetent. Our source confirms the payment was cash, likely from the cards. My knees weakened, but I gripped the table. So they're not just talking, they're building my coffin. Jacob leaned forward, voice steady. Then we'll make them climb into it themselves. When the moment comes, Mrs. Williams, they won't just fail, they'll collapse publicly." For the first time in days, I allowed myself a smile. Good. Let them laugh now. Soon enough, the world will laugh at them. That night, as I locked my bedroom door and slid the chair beneath the knob, I no longer felt alone. The shadows downstairs plotted greed, but I had shadows of my own, armed with cameras, records, and truth. And truth, I thought as I slipped into bed, is heavier than any lie. The plan began with silence. On Friday morning, I packed a small suitcase, slipped my documents into a leather folder, and left a short note on the kitchen table. Running errands. Back later. Then I walked out the door and didn't return. Instead, I checked into a discreet downtown hotel. The receptionist, a young man with freckles, asked how long I would stay. "A few days," I replied. "Maybe longer." He handed me the key card without question. For the first time in years, I turned off my cell phone. No calls, no texts, no explanations. Freedom was quiet, almost frightening in its weight. By afternoon, the voicemails began piling up. Edward's first message was calm, the voice of a dutiful son. "Mom, where are you? Call me." By evening, his tone had shifted. "This isn't like you. You always let us know where you are." Carol left her own coated in syrup. "Anna, we're worried. Please just come home." But beneath the words I heard panic, not for me, but for their slipping control. At dawn the next day, I met Jacob Martinez at the law office. He studied me carefully. "You ready to make this real?" I nodded. "More than ready." Jean entered, carrying a manila folder. "They've been busy. Yesterday, Carol tried to pawn your jewelry collection. The shop owner refused when she couldn't prove ownership. And Edward visited your bank, asking about access to your accounts. He claimed you were showing confusion. The manager stalled him, but he'll be back." Jacob smiled thinly. "Then we give him a stage." We mapped out the trap carefully. The bank manager, an ally I trusted, agreed to let Edward and Carol set their plan in motion. They would arrive expecting easy access, but instead they would meet me, flanked by lawyers and a notary. Every lie they uttered would be documented. That weekend, I stayed in the hotel, rehearsing lines like an actress preparing for opening night. I practiced calm replies. I am in full control of my finances. I imagined their faces when the door opened to find me waiting. The thought kept me steady. On Monday, the curtain rose. I dressed in a navy dress, pearls at my neck, hair styled neatly. I wanted no trace of frailty. Jacob and Jean met me in the lobby, carrying files thick with evidence. Together, we walked into the bank. In the waiting area, Edward and Carol were already seated, whispering over a folder. Carol's nails tapped against the manila cover. Edward's foot jittered nervously. When they saw me, their faces drained of color. "Mom?" Edward stammered. "What are you doing here?" I sat opposite them, folding my hands calmly. "The same thing you are, tending to my accounts." Carol forced a smile. "This is a misunderstanding. We just came to ask some questions." The bank manager approached, professional and poised. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams, may I see your authorization documents?" Edward cleared his throat. "We're finalizing guardianship. My mother's memory has been unreliable. We need to manage her assets for her safety." The words, spoken so confidently, struck like daggers, but I didn't flinch. "Unreliable?" I repeated, voice clear. "I drove myself here. I signed myself in. I know the balance of every account I own. Would you like me to recite them?" Carol's cheeks flushed. "Anna, don't make this harder than at Island." At that moment, Jacob stepped forward, sliding a folder onto the table. "I'm Jacob Martinez, Mrs. Williams's attorney. These are her medical evaluations, signed by 3 independent physicians, certifying perfect cognitive health. Any attempt to claim otherwise constitutes fraud." Jean clicked her recorder on the table. "For the record, please repeat what you just said about her memory." Edward sputtered. This isn't necessary. We're family. Family doesn't forge credit cards," I said evenly. "Family doesn't steal jewelry. Family doesn't try to declare their mother incompetent to pay off gambling debts." His eyes widened. How? How do you know?" "Because truth leaves fingerprints," John cut in, "and you've left plenty." The bank manager cleared her throat. Until proper documentation is provided, there will be no access granted. At this time, all accounts remain under Mrs. Williams's sole control. Silence fell heavy. Carol clutched Edward's arm, eyes darting. Edward opened his mouth, then closed it again, like a man gasping for air underwater. I rose, smoothing my skirt. I'll be meeting with my attorneys now. If you attempt to approach my accounts again, we'll proceed with criminal charges. Walking out of that bank, flanked by Jacob and Jean, I felt taller than I had in years. Behind me, my son and his wife sat pale and cornered, their scheme collapsing under the weight of evidence. The trap had sprung, and they didn't even realize how much deeper they were about to sink. The confrontation at the bank left my son and his wife rattled, though they tried to pretend otherwise. For the next 2 days, the house felt like a stage where every actor had forgotten their lines. Edward stomped through the hallways with clenched fists, while Carol banged pots and pans in the kitchen as though she could scrub humiliation away with noise. Judy barely spoke at all. I returned to the hotel, giving them space to stew. From there, Jean continued feeding me updates. On Tuesday afternoon, she called. "Mrs. Williams, you should know Carol has been posting your antique furniture online. A cherrywood dresser, silver candlesticks, even a grandfather clock. She's claiming you donated them." My hand tightened around the phone. Those items weren't just furniture, they were memories. The dresser had been my mother's wedding gift. The clock had ticked in our living room for 50 years. "They're not hers to sell," I said through my teeth. "Exactly why we're documenting every listing," Jean replied. "By the time she tries to complete a sale, we'll have evidence of fraud and attempted theft." That evening, I checked my voicemail. Edward's voice filled the line. "Mom, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this can't go on. We need cooperation. Stop listening to outsiders. You're confused. Come home and sign the papers." Confused. The word tasted bitter. He no longer even tried to hide the lie. The next morning, Jacob summoned me back to his office. Spread across the table were photographs. Carol leaving a pawn shop, Edward handing an envelope to a man identified as a forger. The envelope bulged with cash. "They're escalating," Jacob said gravely. "The more desperate they get, the sloppier they become. That works in our favor, but it also makes them dangerous." "Dangerous how?" I asked. Jean leaned forward. "When fraud fails, families sometimes try intimidation. We want you safe. Stay at the hotel, lock your door, and don't answer their calls without us present." I nodded, though my heart ached. This was my son they were warning me against. The boy I had sung to sleep now traded cash with criminals. That night, while I sat in my hotel room reviewing notes, a knock startled me. It wasn't Jacob or Jean. When I opened the door, Judy stood there, shoulders hunched, eyes swollen from crying. "Grandma," she whispered, "can I come in?" I hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. She entered timidly, clutching her phone. "I didn't know where else to go," she confessed, sinking into the armchair. "Mom and Dad are fighting nonstop. They say if this goes wrong, they'll blame me. They already told me to start saying you've been forgetting things, leaving the stove on, repeating stories." Her voice cracked. "They want me to lie in court, Grandma." I studied her closely. Was this a trap or a genuine crack in their plan? Tears ran freely down her cheeks, and I decided it was real. "They're using you," I said gently, "just like they're using me. But you don't have to go along." She wiped her eyes. "I don't want to. I swear I don't. But Dad said if I don't cooperate, they'll cut me off completely. And..." She hesitated, placing a hand on her stomach. "I can't risk it. I'm pregnant, Grandma. 3 months. The father doesn't want anything to do with me." My breath caught. I had suspected, but hearing her admit it pierced me deeply. "I need help," Judy whispered. "I don't want to end up like them. If I testify, if I tell the truth, will you stand by me?" I crossed the room and took her hands. "Yes. If you choose truth, I will protect you. But understand this will sever you from your parents. Once you step onto my side, there's no going back." Her eyes met mine, brimming with fear but also determination. "Then I'm already there. I recorded them fighting. I saved the texts where they planned to blame me. I can show you." She unlocked her phone and played an audio clip. Carol's voice spat venom. "If she doesn't play along, we'll say it was her idea to steal the jewelry. No one will believe a pregnant teenager over us." Edward's voice followed. "She'll take the fall. Better her than us." My stomach clenched. They were not just betraying me, they were willing to sacrifice their own daughter. I pulled Judy close, letting her cry against my shoulder. For the first time in weeks, I felt something fragile but real. Hope. "Listen to me, Judy," I said softly. "You are not alone. Tomorrow we'll meet with Jacob and Jean. You'll show them everything. You'll testify when the time comes. And together, we'll make sure the truth burns through every lie they've told." She nodded, whispering into my shoulder. "Deal, Grandma, deal." That night, after Judy fell asleep on the couch in my suite, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker. The storm had torn through my family, but for the first time, I had an ally under my roof again. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was the key to destroying Edward and Carol's house of lies once and for all. 3 weeks later, I walked up the courthouse steps with Judy at my side. She clutched her notebook of evidence as though it were a lifeline. Her face was pale, but her chin was lifted with determination. Reporters clustered near the entrance. Flashes popped. One shouted, "Mrs. Williams, do you think your son will be convicted?" I ignored them. This wasn't about sound bites. It was about survival. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Edward sat at the defense table in a stiff suit, dark circles shadowing his eyes. Carol wore a black dress, mascara heavy enough to suggest grief, though her eyes darted nervously. Their lawyer whispered frantically, but neither of them looked at me. Jacob Martinez guided me to our table. Jean sat behind us, laptop open, files ready. "Stay calm," Jacob murmured. "We have everything we need." The judge entered, gavel striking once. "This court is now in session." The prosecutor began by presenting the evidence Jean had gathered. Fraudulent credit cards, pawn shop attempts, bank statements, and the recorded conversation about switching my medications. Each item was projected on a screen for the jury. The jurors leaned forward, brows furrowed. Carol whispered furiously to Edward, but he stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Then came Judy's turn. She walked slowly to the witness stand, every step echoing. My heart ached watching her, a 19-year-old forced to choose between parents and conscience. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and Saturday. "Miss Williams," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court what you overheard in your home regarding your grandmother?" Judy's voice trembled at first but grew stronger. "My parents talked about declaring her incompetent. They said they would find a doctor willing to sign the papers. They also said if things went wrong, they'd blame me." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Edward shifted uncomfortably. "Do you have proof of these statements?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes." Judy unlocked her phone, handed it to the bailiff. The audio played aloud. Carol's voice, sharp and cruel. "If she doesn't cooperate, we'll say it was her idea. She's just a kid." "No one will believe her." Edward's voice followed. "Better her than us." The jury gasped. One woman covered her mouth. Edward jumped to his feet. "She's lying!" he shouted. The judge slammed the gavel. "Mr. Williams, sit down or you'll be removed from this courtroom." Judy's hands shook, but she pressed on. They also said they'd switch Grandma's medications, hide her things, make her look crazy. I couldn't let that happen. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I wanted to run to her, to hold her, but I stayed seated, knowing strength sometimes meant stillness. The defense attorney rose, pacing in front of the jury. "Miss Williams, isn't it true you're pregnant? Isn't it true your grandmother promised to help you financially if you testified against your parents?" Judy's chin lifted. "Yes, I'm pregnant. And yes, my grandmother promised to support me, but not for lying. For telling the truth. She said if I did the right thing, she'd stand by me. That's what she's doing now." Her words rang clear, slicing through the lawyer's attempt at manipulation. The prosecutor smiled faintly. No further questions. When Judy stepped down, the jury's eyes followed her, many soft with sympathy. She returned to her seat beside Jean, who squeezed her hand. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, shoulders straight, and took the oath. Sitting on the witness stand, I felt decades of teaching return: the calm authority, the steady voice, the demand for truth. "Mrs. Williams," the prosecutor asked, "how did you feel when you discovered your family's plans?" "I felt as though 40 years of sacrifice had been shredded in a single night," I said firmly. "I gave my son everything: education, love, stability. I treated my daughter-in-law as a daughter. I adored my granddaughter. And yet, they planned to erase me for money." My voice didn't tremble. It rang. "But I am not confused. I am not incompetent. I am standing here clear-minded, prepared to fight for the dignity every elder deserves." The defense attorney tried to paint me as vengeful, hiding millions from my family. I did not deny it. "Yes, I kept assets secret," I admitted, "because love should never be measured by inheritance. I wanted my son to stand on his own. Instead, he plotted to destroy me." The jury nodded slowly. They understood. After 5 long days, closing arguments ended. The jury disappeared into deliberation. My hands trembled as I sat with Judy, but when she slipped her fingers into mine, I felt anchored. 2 hours later, the jury returned. The foreman rose, voice steady. "We find the defendants guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, and attempted elder abuse." Carol burst into tears. Edward stared blankly, as if the ground beneath him had vanished. The gavel struck again, final and echoing. Justice had spoken. The verdict echoed long after the jury left the room. Guilty. The word carried both relief and grief. My son and his wife had been unmasked, but it came at a cost I never imagined paying. 2 weeks later, the sentencing hearing brought finality. Edward received 12 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. Carol was sentenced to 10 years, with an additional fine for attempting to sell stolen property. When the judge read the numbers, Carol wept loudly, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Edward sat stone-faced, hollowed by his own choices. I did not cry. I simply breathed, steady and unbroken. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. One asked, "Mrs. Williams, do you feel justice was served?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Legal justice was served. But the deeper justice is knowing I finally see my family clearly, without illusions." I declined further questions and walked away, Judy holding my arm. 6 months later, life looked different. I sold the old house; it no longer felt like home, and bought a smaller property on the edge of town. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, and the garden bloomed with roses and lavender. Judy moved in with me, her belly round with new life. Each morning we shared coffee on the porch. She studied her textbooks. She had decided to pursue law, inspired by everything we endured, while I tended to the garden. In the afternoons we planned for the baby, folding tiny clothes, painting the nursery soft yellow. One evening, Judy asked hesitantly, "Grandma, do you regret adopting Dad?" I paused, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. "No, I don't regret adoption. I regret not seeing sooner that kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. I gave him everything but accountability. That was my mistake." She nodded thoughtfully, her hand resting on her belly. "I don't want to repeat that cycle. I want to raise this child differently, with love, but also with honesty." I smiled. "Then you already have the wisdom I lacked at your age." My hidden assets became tools for rebuilding. With Jacob's guidance, I established a foundation for elder protection. We funded legal assistance for seniors facing abuse, seminars at community centers, and a hotline run by volunteers. Calls poured in. Stories came from women and men across the country: children forging signatures, in-laws draining bank accounts, grandchildren manipulating wills. Every time I answered the phone, I remembered the night Amy whispered, "Don't sign anything. Don't go home." That warning had not only saved me, it gave me purpose. At 73, I no longer feared silence. I filled my days with purpose and my evenings with peace. Friends returned, colleagues I had lost touch with, neighbors who admired my strength, even strangers who wrote letters thanking me for speaking out. Edward and Carol wrote from prison, letters filled with excuses, apologies, and pleas. I left them unopened. Some doors, once closed, should never be reopened. As for Judy, she blossomed. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl with a shock of dark hair and lungs, strong enough to announce herself to the world. We named her Grace. Holding that child in my arms, I felt something I thought I had lost forever: hope. Grace became the daughter of my heart's daughter. Judy often said, "She'll grow up knowing that family is more than blood. It's loyalty, respect, and real love." And she was right. Looking back, I realized I had not lost a family. I had gained one. My son's betrayal carved a wound, but Judy's courage stitched it with new meaning. Together we created a home not built on deception, but on truth. At night, when I sit by the window with Grace in my arms, I whisper the lessons etched into my bones. That real family cannot be forced by bloodlines. That dignity must never be surrendered, no matter the cost. That endings can, if you are brave enough, become beginnings. I am Anna Williams' teacher, widow, mother, grandmother, survivor. For years I lived believing sacrifice guaranteed love. Now I live knowing self-respect guarantees freedom. And to anyone listening, I say this: it is never too late to start over.